I never thought a simple train ride could change my life forever. It was a quiet evening at home, and I needed to visit my relatives in the countryside. With money being tight, I decided to travel by train. I packed my bag and stepped out of the house, the chill of the evening air cutting through my jacket. As I made my way to the station, the road grew increasingly deserted. The familiar sounds of the city faded, replaced by an eerie silence. By the time I reached the station, the unease had settled deep in my bones. The platform was nearly empty, just a few solitary figures shrouded in shadows, waiting for their own journeys. The station itself felt forgotten, as if it hadn't seen a lively crowd in years. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows on the cracked pavement. I sat on a cold, metal bench, waiting for the train. The place had an unsettling vibe, the kind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Eventually, the train arrived with a mournful whistle, its ancient metal frame groaning as it settled on the tracks. It looked like a relic from another time, its paint faded and windows grimy. The carriages were dimly lit, and the flickering lights did little to dispel the darkness within. I boarded the train, finding the halls empty and the lights flickering ominously. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks was my only company, punctuated by the occasional creak of the old metal frame. As I walked through the narrow corridor, each step echoed loudly, amplifying the emptiness around me. The walls of the train seemed to close in on me as I moved forward, the dim, flickering lights casting eerie, distorted shadows. The air inside was stale, carrying the faint scent of dust and something else I couldn't quite place, a lingering mustiness that hinted at long-forgotten memories and unspoken secrets. The metal railings were cold to the touch, sending a shiver through my fingertips as I steadied myself against the swaying motion of the train. Each compartment I passed was vacant, their doors slightly ajar and swinging gently with the motion of the train. The seats were covered in worn, faded upholstery, and the windows were grimy, letting in only the faintest glimmer of the darkened landscape outside. Occasionally, a gust of cold air would sweep through the corridor, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was as if the train itself was breathing, exhaling cold breaths that seeped into my bones. I leaned back in my seat, trying to relax, but a strange sensation prickled at the back of my neck. It was as if I was being watched. The dim, flickering lights above cast eerie, distorted shadows that danced on the walls, amplifying my sense of unease. I glanced around, but the compartments around me were empty, their doors slightly ajar, creaking with the train's movement. Despite the emptiness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks and the occasional groan of the old metal frame. The steady sounds should have been soothing, but instead, they seemed to underscore the unnatural stillness of the carriage. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. After all, night trains were supposed to be eerie, right? I closed my eyes, hoping to drift off to sleep, but the uneasy sensation only grew stronger. It felt like invisible eyes were boring into me, scrutinizing my every move. My skin prickled with an almost electrical tension, making it impossible to relax. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint sound of a whistle, a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding. The train had entered a tunnel, the darkness outside becoming absolute. The flickering lights inside the compartment cast strange, dancing shadows on the walls. Suddenly, a chill swept through the carriage, far colder than any autumn breeze. The temperature seemed to plummet, and my breath fogged in the air. I glanced around, searching for the source of the cold, and then I saw a figure standing at the far end of the compartment. It was a woman, her form barely illuminated by the dim light. She wore a tattered, old-fashioned dress, her hair hanging in matted tangles around her pale face. Her eyes, hollow and dark, seemed to bore into mine. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The woman began to move towards me, her steps slow and deliberate, the sound of her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As she drew closer, I could see the ghostly pallor of her skin, the dark circles under her eyes. She stopped just a few feet away, her gaze never wavering. "Do you see them?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the train's rumble. "Who I managed to croak, my voice shaking." "The others," she replied, gesturing to the empty compartments. "They are here too, always watching, always waiting." I glanced around, but the compartments were still empty. "I don't see anyone," I said, my voice trembling. "They hide in the shadows," she said, her voice filled with an eerie calm. "They are bound to this train, just like me." Why, I asked, my curiosity overcoming my fear for a moment. "A curse," she said simply. "A long-forgotten tragedy that ties us to this place. We cannot leave, and neither can you." Panic surged through me at her words. "I have to get off this train," I said, standing up abruptly. "You can't," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "It's too late." Ignoring her, I stumbled towards the compartment door, wrenching it open. The corridor outside was empty, the flickering lights casting long, sinister shadows. I ran down the length of the carriage, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I reached the door to the next compartment and flung it open, only to find another deserted carriage. Desperation clawed at me as I ran through carriage after carriage, each one identical, each one empty. It was as if the train had no end, an endless labyrinth of darkened compartments and ghostly whispers. I could hear them now, the voices of the others, faint and distant, calling my name. Finally, I reached the last carriage. It was different from the others, the walls lined with old photographs and faded newspaper clippings. I slowed my pace, my eyes scanning the images. They were all of the same train, the same carriages, and in each one, I could see shadowy figures lurking in the background. My heart pounded as I realized the truth. This train, this cursed train, was a ghost itself, trapped in a never-ending journey through the night. And now, I was a part of it, doomed to ride its haunted tracks forever. As the realization sank in, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned to see the woman standing behind me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Welcome to the night train," she said softly. "We have been waiting for you." The train whistle echoed through the night, a mournful sound that seemed to carry the weight of eternity. And as the darkness closed in around me, I knew that I had to escape, no matter the cost. Summoning every ounce of courage, I tore away from the woman's icy grip and bolted down the carriage. The ghostly whispers grew louder, more urgent, but I forced myself to ignore them. Each step felt like wading through quicksand, but I pushed on, driven by sheer desperation. I reached the end of the carriage and flung open the door, the cold night air hitting me like a wall. The train was still hurtling through the darkness, the landscape outside a blur. I knew jumping was madness, but staying meant eternal entrapment. Without another thought, I leaped from the train. The impact was jarring, my body tumbling and rolling across the rough terrain. Pain shot through me, but I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline propelling me forward. I glanced back to see the train receding into the distance, its ghostly passengers watching me with hollow eyes. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs could carry me no further. The night air was sharp and cold against my skin, each breath a ragged gasp as I stumbled through the darkness. The distant echo of the haunted train seemed to fade with every step, but its chilling presence lingered in my mind, an unshakable shadow that clung to me. As I finally approached my house, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, trying to steady my racing heart. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt hollow, every creak and groan of the old wood amplifying my sense of unease. The darkness inside seemed to press in on me, a stark reminder of the malevolent force I had narrowly escaped. The flickering of the overhead lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the house feel as though it were alive with the memories of the haunted train, The vision of the ghostly woman, the empty compartments, and the oppressive silence of the train haunted me, replaying in my mind like a never-ending loop.